Okay, we're going to go and get started on the next session. And we'll be hearing from Ms. Rebecca Morgan, who's going to talk to us a little bit about, I didn't catch the title of it. Well, Rebecca Morgan will be talking to us about Recon, SDRs, choke points, and safe havens, and what that means for you.
All right, thank you, Chris. Thank you so much to everybody who's here today. Also being recorded for future purposes, so welcome to all of you. As Chris said, my name is Rebecca Morgan, and I have about a little over 25 years of experience in some form of law enforcement investigations and counterintelligence. And I'm really excited to come out and speak with you all today. I know that this is the OPSEC applying Operation Security to some personal safety issues, and I want to talk about that as well. Over the course of the 2 days that you spend here, you've probably spent a lot of time discussing elements of risk management and Operation Security, ways to identify threats, ways to address vulnerabilities. And once you do that and assess your risk, you need to implement some countermeasures. And so some of the things I'm going to be talking about today are implementing countermeasures to prevent surveillance, being followed, that type of thing. So I do want to give a little bit of a caveat. So I am looking to apply what I know from my intelligence and law enforcement experience in counter-surveillance and surveillance detection to personal safety. However, these concepts are originally designed to root out a clandestine operative. These are techniques that are originally designed to identify somebody that may be following you who doesn't want to know you to know that they're following them. So I want you to take what I say today, absorb it, use the common sense elements of it, but please don't go Googling surveillance detection and counter surveillance and think that you're going to employ these techniques for yourself or your clients. Because some of them, if you were to follow ones that I'm not talking about but that are a general part of the practice, can actually increase your vulnerability, can actually increase risk of harm, or back you into corners or things. And those are great things if you're trying to find out if a counter spy is following you where you go to dead drop your documents, but they're not great things if you're trying to do personal safety. So we really are going to focus on the common sense elements of counter surveillance and surveillance detection that can apply to personal safety. But I just don't want to give you enough knowledge to be dangerous so that now you think you're experts at running SDRs, and when you Google something or decide to take this other class that you can always apply that, and sometimes it can increase your harm. So with that being said, let's talk about this a little bit. The easiest way to find out if you're being followed, not be followed at all, right? So rather than try to fix a problem after the fact, let's do an ounce of prevention. So you want to prevent yourself from being followed or surveilled. And I will just reiterate, I was talking with some of the attendees on the break. We're not talking in this particular presentation about cyber. So it's very different techniques. If somebody is following you online, if you're being cyber stalked or somebody is gathering your information, I really am talking about in a physical environment. So being physically followed on foot, in a vehicle, even public transportation. Often that cyber stalking can be a precursor to an actual physical event. So somebody physically looking to attack, follow. Often, maybe the clients that you work with are folks that are looking or do have protective orders in place, and how to identify if those are being violated, if somebody's invading space that shouldn't be invaded. So this really is the physical realm. So once you've attempted to minimize your digital footprint and reduce the ability to be cyber stalked, really the goal is to prevent that physical harm. This is another way to just ensure that nothing is going on there. And again, it's always easier to prevent something from happening than to deal with it once it is. So you want to look at the idea of preventing yourself from being followed to begin with. I will tell you that in order to do that, routine is the enemy. Anybody who gets into a normal routine puts himself at risk for surveillance or for being discovered if they're trying to restart over in a new place, start with a new identity. I will tell you that I am addicted to Diet Coke, and not just any Diet Coke. It has to be the big gulp from the 7-Eleven with like a certain amount of ice. That is my thing, right? Some people drink coffee or whatever, that's my thing. I could move anywhere in this country, and if you wanted to find me, if you staked out the 7-Elevens in that zip code, you would eventually find me. And then from there, follow me to my home, my place of work, my children's school, all those places that I frequent. So if you have somebody that is a client that you're trying to relocate, to get into a safer area, to start a new life, and there is a concern that a threat is going to invade that space, follow them, whatever, you really need to impress upon them the idea that you cannot have those same routines. So you have to vary things, and whether that's, I don't know where else I could get my big gulp fix. Maybe I go to Royal Farms or something instead. Whatever it is, maybe I cut that out altogether for a while. There's some things you can't cut out, though, and so you have to understand where those patterns exist in your life. We leave at the same time for work every day or to walk our kids to school every day. We love Taco Tuesday at a certain restaurant, and we're always there. When you have patterns, that is an in for your threat, for your attacker, to pick up and identify where you are and proceed into that physical stalking realm that we're trying to prevent. So varying your pattern is a big prevention technique. I will tell you it's easier said than done with some things, right? It's very easy to say to somebody, well, don't arrive at the work the same time every day. Vary your routine. Don't drop the kids off at school the same time every day. Vary your routine. Well, school starts at a certain time. Work starts at a certain time. Now, could you work with an employer or a school administration to make allowances for a particularly threatening situation? In some cases, yes, you could. And I would encourage anybody who works in those environments or with those environments to remind them that many kinetic violence events, many active shooter events begin with domestic situations. So it is in their best interest to sometimes make those accommodations. But I realize I am speaking to you as a middle-class white woman, to be frank. And I work in a profession where they're going to, and not that I'm not at risk for domestic violence, absolutely am, but I work in a profession where they might say, oh, sure, if you want to vary your hours, no big deal. If you work at fast food, if you work at different kind of wage environments, it's not going to be necessarily as inviting. We hope they would be, but suddenly you've got a boss that says, you are not worth the trouble, lady, you're fired, So you have to judge your risk in every phase of this. Is the threat great enough that you need to vary your hours that it makes it worth the risk of addressing this to the employer? And that's something you have to gauge on a case-by-case basis. Same with the school environment. Would the school allow you to drop off and pick up at different times for a safety issue? Absolutely. But in many cases, if you're working with a client who's trying to normalize things for a child, to try to reestablish things for a child, that's going to be pretty disruptive for that child. So you have to weigh that factor, whether the risk is high enough that it's worth putting in place this countermeasure or not. And there might be periods of time where it is worth it. There might be periods of time where it's not. So we've talked about varying routine a little bit, varying schedule. One of the things you also want to do is vary the routes that you take. We are talking about physical surveillance. We are talking about threats of physical harm. If you are traveling the same route to these areas day in and day out, again, whether it's to the 7-Eleven to get the big gulp, it's to the school to drop off your kids, it's to work, it's to Taco Tuesday, whatever, You establish these route patterns, and it's very easy for somebody to pick up on that, to observe that, and to pick those points of targeting. So it's really critical that whether we're varying the times of departure and arrival, whether we're varying the 7-Eleven we show up at, or whether we're varying how we go, that we address the possibility of alternate routes. And it's really easy to get stuck and you think, there is literally no other way to go. This is the only way from my house to work. I have no choice. You'd be surprised, actually, at the alternates that are out there. And I highly encourage anybody that's establishing somebody for relocation or establishing a client who maybe has issued some protective orders to look at the possible alternate routes for those day-to-day activities. Truly, the easiest way to do it is pull up Google Maps. And you can identify a number of alternate ways to get where you're going. While you're doing that, you can also identify both threats and vulnerabilities along the routes, as well as potential safe havens. So when you're identifying your potential routes and you looking at some places, there's no alternative, right? So you have to depart from your house if you're departing. Any place that you have to hit on the map to get where you're going, and there may be a certain intersection that even if you took this route, and even if you took this route, you're always going to cross here in order to end up at work or school, those are called choke points. Those are points along the route where somebody can know they can pick you up. So you think you're being all fancy, you leave your house and you go left here, and you take an unnecessary right there, and you go 3 miles around on the scenic route, and you think, oh, there's no way anybody followed me, I'm varying my routes. But if you always have to cross this one intersection to get where you're going, why would I follow you on this fancy circular route? I'm just going to sit there and wait for your car to go by and pick up surveillance then. So it's important that you identify those nodes along your route. Your office or the school would be another one. And those are places, can't avoid them. That's okay. Acknowledge they exist. Acknowledge that you will be specifically vigilant in those areas. Acknowledge that that might be the one place where you need to be hyper aware of who may be following you or who may be observing your behavior or activity. Also, sometimes you can incorporate these into a protective order. So if you're looking for a client that is getting a protective order issued. Now, can you get a protective order on the corner of 4th and Main? No, that's a public area, anybody can go there. But there might be other ones, particularly work and school environments, where that protective order can be employed, and it's worth having that consultation with your legal guidance or the judiciary that's helping you with that, and letting them know we're aware of these potential threat areas. You also want to acknowledge attack sites along a certain route, and you might think, I've found 3 alternate routes, so this is great. I can vary my routine. I'm going to leave at different times on different days. I'm going to alternate which route I take. But if there are routes that are particularly fraught with attack points, any place where you're more vulnerable than others, you might want to avoid those. If it's a long stretch of lonely wooded road with no assistance around, perhaps that's not the wisest, because the inevitable will happen, right? A flat tire, good place for somebody to run you off the road and then try to target you there. So you want to stick to populated areas. You want to minimize those attack points, minimize going into a blind alley, a cul-de-sac, that type of thing. Now, if that's where daycare is, and that's one of your choke points, that's worth bringing into the conversation with the protective order. Or at least making the client aware, this is where we're hypervigilant. This is where we have a buddy system, perhaps, if that's available to them. This is where you have 911 and you're ready to hit send on your phone when you're in this area. Something to consider. Another thing to consider is that there are likely a lot of safe havens along these routes as well. And you may, just from driving your regular route to work, any one of us might be able to think of a police station, a fire station, a hospital, a church, points along the way where we could get help if we needed it. What you'll likely identify when you sit down with the Google Maps and you start looking at those route possibilities, there are far more than you thought, that you have a lot more areas for help than you believed. And this can include a busy store. This can include a Walmart, a McDonald's, anywhere that's bright, lit. Once you've identified these routes with your attack points, your choke points, potential safe havens, it's a good idea to test them out. And I'm talking about driving, but this can apply on foot, this can apply on public transportation. You need to consider this for whatever mode that your client is out there in the world. You really ought to test them out. You might find that a safe haven that you thought is only open certain hours, isn't as populated as you thought, isn't as welcoming as you thought. Or you might find that there are 4 more that you didn't even realize that are there. You'll probably identify additional choke points, and you'll probably identify additional attack points, and this can help you refine those routes. So having this in place allows you to bust up your daily routine. It allows you to bust up areas where people might be able to identify your patterns and then pick up surveillance of you. Again, when surveillance is, or counter-surveillance or surveillance detection is conducted from an intelligence perspective, there are a lot of different techniques that would be used. And so if I want to know if somebody's following me, I might, enter a place that only has one way out, see who comes in, see if they go out, might go into a cul-de-sac, might do things. Please don't do these things or encourage your clients to do these things, because these can increase vulnerability, and it's quite a different endeavor to prevent somebody, watching you go meet a source than it is to prevent somebody who's intent on doing you physical harm. So 2 different things. So just keep that in mind when considering personal safety. All right, so are there any questions on that part, on the prevention of surveillance? You guys are all good? I really just want to reinforce that these are common sense elements, right? So, and it sounds like common sense and no duh, who wouldn't do this? But we don't. We don't think about it. We don't understand the techniques. Sometimes we don't want to take the time. We were having this conversation earlier. We all know we should monitor our credit card reports, that would be the best thing to determine if anybody's targeting our identity or opening accounts in our name or whatever. But do we all do it? No. We get complacent. And so just something to consider. So that surveillance detection, I just talked about some of the techniques to understand if you're being followed. Please don't do the blind alley ones. There are other things that you can do, though, and much in the common sense vein. So the one key thing is situational awareness. And I know this is a conference sponsored by an operations security organization. I think they've probably drilled into you over the last couple of days how critical that is to be aware of your surrounding and your environments. It is particularly critical when you're at those choke points that you're aware, because that's where somebody's going to pick you up to follow you. So your head is on a swivel. You're looking for repeaters. You're looking for people that are there time after time. Some simple, safe things you can do: drive around the block. That's 3 right turns. And is someone still following you? Or when you do that, is the same person or car or vehicle still parked somewhere and it's unexpected? Looking for that stationary surveillance, particularly for those who maybe the protective order extends to a certain perimeter around a home or work, and so there's somebody just on the perimeter always observing. You need to be observant for those kind of situations, and it really is just a matter of looking for anything outside the ordinary. You can do things like, maybe speeding up, slowing down. I really don't, in a vehicle, recommend super crazy maneuvers. It's more dangerous. It does more harm than good. But when you feel threatened, or when your clients feel threatened, that's when you head to the safe haven. That's when you go for help. Also, the cell phone is a powerful tool. I think we've seen it be a powerful tool personally, but also in everything from personal safety to social justice movements. Take a photo of that individual, of that repeater, of that stationary that you identified. Take a photo of the driver's license. Share that with your legal representation. When you go to a safe haven and you are contacting law enforcement for assistance, share the photo, share the license plate number. Sometimes just the act of surveilling back with the phone is enough to get somebody to stop and go away. Just to reiterate, there's not a technique here that I can give you, or probably anything you've learned or will learn over the last 2 days, that will eliminate risk. We're not in the risk elimination business. We're in the risk management business. So you can recognize threats, address your vulnerabilities, and lower your risk, but it's never going to go away. So that ability to stay aware, stay alert, and handle a situation when it comes up. Don't panic if you detect surveillance. React and respond appropriately, and you can do that because you've planned. You've done your reconnaissance on your routes. You know the places that you can go. Okay. So, talking a little bit about countermeasures, I mean, evasion is the best one. Don't get followed in the first place. So, blend into the crowd. You know, you may have a client who's relocated and starting over, and that's exciting for them, but don't do it with a bright yellow Porsche or you know, something flamboyant if they're trying to evade detection, surveillance, following, being picked up back by an abuser or a stalker or somebody in their life. This is not the time to be flashy. It is the time to blend in. It is a time to understand your environment. It is a time to vary your routine. And I will say that complacency is really the enemy here. We all get lulled into that sense of, I was hypervigilant for a little while, everything's fine now, and all those security countermeasures fall by the wayside. We stop doing them. We get busy, right? We have other things to do. But you can't. You have to remain hypervigilant. And you know your clients better than anybody when the situations warrant it. You don't want to overly stress somebody out if this isn't the actual threat environment that they're in, right? So you might have somebody who's not really at risk for this kind of physical attack, surveillance, or stalking. Don't freak them out with these techniques, you know, when it's warranted, because it is stressful to live like this, because you got to keep it up. So if you have alternate routes and you're varying your routine, the time that you arrive and depart and all that, that's great, but it has to really be varied. If you take Route A every Monday, Route B every Tuesday, and Route C every Wednesday, all you've done is establish a new routine. So varied routine truly means mixing stuff up on a regular basis. Arrivals, departures, things you can do at a place of work if there are alternate parking locations, right? Alternate entrances. Don't always go in the front door. If there's a parking that's covered or around back so that a drive-by at your choke point won't be able to immediately see that you're there or that your vehicle is there. There are alternate locations for picking the children up, or they ride a bus to a safe haven and you get them there. So there are a lot of things that you can put into place when you're under this kind of imminent threat. Make sure you explore your options and make sure you keep that varied routine. It's super easy to fall back into the old routine. Tactical maneuvers, they exist. And I know just because you watched Born Supremacy that you think if somebody's following you that suddenly you're like parkouring off of buildings and you're gonna like pull your cell phone apart on the run and break the battery and escape. This is not gonna happen. let's just be honest here. This is not going to happen. You might have watched Fast and Furious. Y'all can't drive like that. And whatever threat that you're avoiding is probably not as great as the threat of a car accident, or even if you're on foot, getting run over by running into traffic. We've seen that in the movies, right? Oh, this guy won't follow me. I'm going to run and hop on this car. You can't do it. And I know we all think we can vicariously by watching these movies, but that's not the technique that you need to take, right? It's that simple, common sense stuff. And I will posit this, and I say it. I don't want to offend anybody, but I've worked in law enforcement and intelligence, and for the Department of Defense for over 25 years. Some of my best friends are still law enforcement. There's a lot of law enforcement and intelligence folks that have volunteered their time here today and do for this cause a lot. However, that community is not immune from domestic violence. And in some instances, there have been studies that show that there is actually a higher rate in those communities. So if you think you can tactically outmaneuver in your vehicle or on foot somebody who's had law enforcement, military, or intelligence training, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So that's why we need to have the other techniques in play, right? And even for the pros, these are very difficult kind of maneuvers to do, don't always end well. So they're not going to end well for you or your clients. So those other techniques are simple things: the safe havens, the cell phone at the ready, the ability to recognize when you're being targeted so you can manage the risk. And that really is what this is about. So does anybody have any questions on anything that we've covered? Yes, ma'am. Yep. He's got a low jack or whatever on your car. So you can do a vehicle sweep. I'll tell you, if somebody's good at it, it's pretty difficult to find. So I would go to an auto body shop, or you can reach out to law enforcement or fire safety will sometimes help you do that sweep. I will tell you, though, that who has an Easy Pass? Are you guys mostly local here? I got an Easy Pass. Easy Pass knows where I am all the time. I've also got a cell phone that knows where I am all the time. So while you might find a physical device, there might be cyber methodology. So there are places on the dark web where you can pay a fee for somebody who's already hacked the Easy Pass system to target a particular vehicle. Now, is your particular threat actor sophisticated enough to do that, going to go to that level? I don't know. That's something that you have to evaluate when you're evaluating your threat environment. But just because you swept your car and there's no sign of a low jack doesn't mean you're safe, is what I'm trying to say. So you can do that, and you might feel more comfortable, hey, I'm probably okay, but don't ever be complacent, because we don't know. There's too many other ways to make that identification right now. Ma'am, did you have a question?
I did, but I realized that you're really talking more about like the physical
environment,
because when you mentioned the dark web, I had a question about it, but I can
Ask one of the cyber geeks. I mean, I might be able to answer, and I have a little bit of a cyber critical infrastructure protection background, but here's a cyber geek right now. Chris, come join us. So I'm really talking about the physical surveillance, and once somebody's used their cyber technique to locate a target and physically follow, attack, address them. But some of the audience members have questions about how do you prevent that from the cyber side to begin with, and our friend right here had one.
Okay.
Okay. So just because you mentioned the dark web, we went through a bunch of different ways and that you can sort of remove your information from like the regular like Google searches and things. But how do you know if like you've even been mentioned on the dark web or if your information has been shared to be preemptive in you know these preventative measures?
Okay, specifically on the dark web or in any context?
Specifically dark web.
Okay, that's a tricky one. But however, the nature of the dark web makes that a little bit easier in this regard because it is not user-friendly. The dark web does not have URLs. It has something closer to hash codes or hash values where the addresses don't often make sense. And that's because of the nature of it. The way the dark web kind of works is it's an overlay over the network, the internet as we know it. So the traffic that goes across the dark net is traveling across the same lines, but it's encrypted. So it goes from your computer to the first hop, which is one of the nodes that operates on that encrypted mesh. And then all that first hop knows is it knows where it needs to go next. So it goes to another hop and then another one and so on, peeling off different layers as it goes. That's what they call the onion routing network. Tor is what routes across that. And so it becomes very, very difficult to find that even if you know what you're looking for. So at that point, it either goes into the ClearNet, it either finds an exit node and goes out from some other country, or it stays on that encrypted network where there are servers that store data. So that's why it becomes hard to find information you're looking for if you're looking for it. The benefit being is there aren't many places to put information, because if they want it to be found, it has to be linked somewhere. You can't, there's no functional, there's a couple that have tried, but there's no real functional search engine for the dark web. You can't get on there and go to dark web Google and start looking for your name like you could on the ClearNet, which kind of catalogs that. It doesn't work the same on the darknet. So what you have is and I don't recommend spending too much time browsing it unless you have to, resources like the Hidden Wiki. If you Google the Hidden Wiki, you'll find some of the major directories of the darknet. And there you'll find ones that specifically say, yeah, here's a pastebin type resource for doxing or something like that. So you can kind of limit where you're going to.
Thank you.
So
Absolutely.
thank you. No, and as we discussed, right, so while it's possible, it depends on the intent and capability of your adversary, of the threat that's coming after you. So is it possible for them to do this? Absolutely. Is it likely? Do you have a higher risk of that? You know, you have to weigh that. But again, complacency is the enemy. And so we don't want to ever presume that we're 100% in the clear. And that's why just the basic common sense stuff, even the situational awareness, even the varied routine. And again, it's high stress to keep that up over a long period of time. So you'll have to reevaluate. That's the nice thing about Operation Security is it's a cycle. And you reevaluate time and again to determine which dynamic elements have changed. Has my threat reduced? Have my vulnerabilities reduced or gone up? And then you're reevaluating what your risk is in that moment and then determining whether the countermeasures are worth it. And even though all the countermeasures that we talked about today were low cost, they're not stress-free. So that is a non-financial cost to them that you do have to consider over time. Okay. Did anybody else have any questions? Okay. I finished a little early. I really appreciate getting the chance to talk to you all. I talked to some of you out in the lobby beforehand. Absolutely my pleasure. If you ever decide you have questions on this in the future and you want to reach out through the organization itself, Mr. Cox and Ms. Damba can always get a hold of me, and I'd be more than happy to facilitate or answer those. So thank you guys very much.
All right, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. We'll see you later.
I've actually had the pleasure of working with Ms. Morgan for quite some time, and this is something that she cares very much about the concepts in general, but also about using that same information to help others that might not have the same information. Because it's really interesting, some of the concepts that she's talking to you about are based in the same things that we're talking about high-risk scenarios. We're talking about things that spies operating in foreign nations and hostile nations might use to keep themselves safe. And we're talking about things that law enforcement may use in order to protect their operations. In fact, ultimately, in a roundabout way, one of the founding events that led to Operation Safe Escape as we know it today came from the law enforcement world, where police officers were asking questions about SWAT operations and how do you protect that information. and then start asking questions about, well, how can we use this for different audiences? And those questions start to lead into different answers, and those answers make more questions. So it's interesting how we can apply things that are made for one different environment, finally start asking, what can we do to apply it to what we're doing in our daily lives? Some of what she had talked about, I do. Sometimes you do look at your own patterns, and you do look at your own life and what you're doing. You think, what does that mean to someone who's watching? And then you ask the question, is someone watching? It's kind of, I think Rebecca does a good job finding that balance, where it's very, very tempting to say, to protect yourself, just change your route to work every day. How do you change your route to work every day in downtown DC? Unless you don't want to go to work, that's an option too. The reality is that generally there's one route that you use and one route that you come back and everything else. It becomes very easy to see, okay, they're on their way to work, I know where they are and everything else. But is that always a problem? If you look at your life, if you actually take an honest look and say, I don't think there's a threat that warrants that right now, then maybe you don't need to take those extreme measures, because the only one that ends up getting affected is you. But if you look and you say, well, there's been some suspicious things going on. I keep seeing the same vehicle, or I keep seeing these other issues. Maybe I do need to take some precautions. So everything that you're using, or everything that you're hearing today, especially this presentation here, just apply that common sense, that sniff test, to say, when do I need to employ this? What things do I need to always employ? What things do I need to employ as needed? What is really the factor here? So that was a great presentation. I'm glad we had the opportunity for it. I'm glad you came.